Memories, they are images in our mind. They are windows to our past in the ever-changing present. They can be as vivid as yesterday or dulled by the passage of time. They can last forever or be robbed from us by disease. My parents, Josef and Aranka, are survivors of the Holocaust, and I learned at a very early age what that meant.
Can you read the number? 1785558.
My mother has dementia. Mom always wanted to improve her written English, and many years before this insidious disease began to eat away at her memories, a simple self-taught language exercise led to the memoir she wrote, filling several notebooks with her Holocaust experience and my parents' love story, and created the resulting diary that was the story of how my parents met, how they fell in love, and what my mom endured during the Holocaust. I always had this inner drive and need to help her tell her story, because my life has come out of that experience. My mother can no longer tell her story, so I decided to do it by following the path of her journey in the present and looking for the remnants of her past. In a sense, what lies within the tangles of my mother's memory lies beneath the surface of these places that time may have changed, but can never truly erase. It is a true story of the struggle to survive, to love, and to remember.
Hello.
Happy birthday, dear Mom. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Mom,
I love you.
and I love you. Do you know where I'm calling you from to say happy birthday?
At the car.
Atkar, you knew that. Did Dad tell you that?
I have a feeling, no?
I am standing on the property of what was the Moses home in Atkar, in front of what might have been where your front door was to your house, and I'm saying happy birthday and I love you.
Oh, thank you, Stephen.
My name is Aranka. I was born in Atkar, Hungary, on the first day of May in the year 1924 to a happy couple that loved each other very much. There were 4 children born before me. They were my sisters Gisela, Gizi, Gabriela, Ella, my brother Laszlo, Laci, and my sister Borbala, Bori. After me, there was one more addition to the family, my sister Eva. Our house was set on several acres of land, and attached was a kochma, a bar where men would come to drink and play cards or a bowling game outside. Off to the side was a barn and a large garden, where we grew all types of vegetables. Atkar was a small village, and we were one of the few Jewish families. We would walk 5 kilometers to the next town in order to attend services at the synagogue there. We went to a school across the road about 2 blocks away, which carried us through the 6th grade. After that, families that could afford it would send their children to the city, Gyöngyös, for higher education. We would have picnics in the spring and summer, and at harvest time, Friends and neighbors came to help us cut the wheat, pick the corn, and gather the fruits and vegetables. Afterwards, we all ate, drank, and danced. Life for us was really nice.
Gadal v'kadash shemei rabo, yomo divro chirutei v'yamlich machutei, v'chayekon v'yomechon v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael.
When I was 10 years old, my father died of a heart attack. He was 44 years old. My mother's heart was broken. Life became very sad. When I was a teenager, my sister Gizzy told me that I should go to the city, them.This, where I would be able to go to school 3 days a week and work 3 days a week. I worked as an apprentice hairdresser. I would give manicures while trying to learn how to cut and style hair. I was glad to have been able to come to the city. Everything seemed to be working out quite well.
I always remembered my mom referring to them.This as the city. And when I got to them.This, it really was a small town, certainly bigger than the village of Atkar, yet it was a very quaint, small town. But I realized that, for my mother, this was a very happy place, and part of her coming of age that held a lot of opportunity for her.
I came home one weekend for a visit and found that our bar and game room were closed. A new law had been passed preventing my mother from keeping them. Soon after, this applied to all of our land as well. One morning, as I went to work in the city, I saw some strange-looking soldiers. I asked my boss who these soldiers were, and he told me that we were under German occupation. Jewish people had to obey the new laws set down by the Germans. The yellow star, which had to be displayed prominently on our outer clothing, was only the beginning. We were not permitted on the streets of the city during curfew hours, and people became afraid for their lives and those of their families. One day, after work, I was walking along the street when an older man called after me to stop. He said, "I want you to go home and tell your mother that you have seen the chief of police. I was a good friend of your father, and your mother knows me. Tell her to pack up whatever she can and come to the city. If your family stays in the village, they will be killed tonight. Take the yellow star off your coat. Leave in the dark and walk on the side streets." I felt paralyzed, but I did exactly as the man told me. My brother Laci was serving in the Hungarian army at this time, and my sister Eva was working and living in Budapest. Gizi, Ela, and Bori were home that night, and we all loaded up the carriage with clothing, some household items, a few chickens, and geese. My poor mother had tears in her eyes. We rode off into the night, glancing back at our home for the last time.
Although they thought they were escaping the problem in Atkar, in a sense, they delivered themselves to the Nazis in them.This. So I felt this strange conflict about a place that held so much promise for my mom and made her happy, but was the beginning of her descent into hell.
All Jews were called to the town square. We were told that each person was allowed to bring only 2 pounds of clothing and personal belongings to the ghetto. We were marched through the city like some perverse parade. People stood around here and watched the Jews being given away to the Nazis. Some had tears in their eyes. Others had big smiles on their faces.
The synagogue, which was actually called the Great Synagogue of Gyöngyös, now houses a furniture store and a clothing store, although the outer facade is still the same. It's almost as if they're reminding you of what once was alive, but is now dead. And for those who lived, like my mom, the choice was not to go back, because what were they going back to? An empty shell.
Inside the ghetto, things were quite bad. It was unbelievable the way people suffered. Some were locked in a room for questioning, and they returned with battered, broken bodies. Once a day you were allowed to go to the water pump and get one pail of water, if you weren't afraid of the Nazi soldiers who watched your every move.
Imagining what it was like to be crammed into rooms with people, or to be beaten or tortured, or having the threat of death around you every day, and not knowing what would happen one day to the next. It was just a very uncomfortable feeling for me to walk through this building and peer into the rooms and just try and picture my mother and her sisters and her mother, forced to live in that kind of environment and having everything taken away from them. And I began to feel uncomfortable to the point where I was almost afraid of being there.
We stayed in the Gyöngyös ghetto for about 1 month. Then came new orders. We were to leave for the train station that would transport us to yet another ghetto in another city. The Nazi soldiers stood around shouting, herding us onto the train, and making sure that no escapes were accomplished. We arrived at this ghetto in Hatvan, which had been a sugar refinery owned by a wealthy Jewish family. Again, the Nazis would take various family members into an area used for questioning and torture. We heard outcries from the victims for hours, and then it became very quiet. Beginning the next day, people had to line up and surrender any money or jewelry they still had. Some female soldiers became gynecologists and checked for hidden valuables. Throughout the night, we heard women screaming and crying.
Although it was only a few days that my mom was in Hatvan, I started to think about what those few days were like. For a young girl to be trapped, surrounded by this torture, this control, this loss of life as she knew it, and not understanding why.
We were marched out of the Hatvan ghetto to the train. All of the Jews were loaded onto the cattle cars. I cannot tell you how many people were squeezed into one car. There was no room to move. There was only one small window in the car we were in. There wasn't much air, and we felt as if we would suffocate. There was a bucket and a blanket in one corner of the car. This was how we were to dispose of our waste. There was a deadly silence, or at times crying, screaming, and praying. The train kept going for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, oh God, finally the train stopped. The air was cold with fog so thick we could barely see where we were going. My sisters and I held our mother's hands as we walked from the train. We saw many soldiers holding whips and guns separating the people into different groups. The old and young were being sent to different places. I didn't want to leave my mother, so a soldier dragged me away from her and hit me with the butt of his gun. My sisters were with me, and as we looked back, we could barely see my mother, with her hands raised, gesturing for us to go quietly. She disappeared into the fog. We had to keep moving. We were heartsick at being separated from our mother. We were very frightened, not knowing where we were, what was going to happen to us or to Mom. After this, we knew that we must always try to stay together. We sisters agreed to use the name of our village, Atkar, as a signal. If for any reason we could not see each other, we would call out Atkar, Atkar, as a signal to the others. We were led into some kind of camp, but with the darkness of night and the thickness of the fog, we could see little of the surroundings. We were pushed into a barracks, which contained several long wooden bunk beds in a row, one on top of another. 12 girls had to go into each row of bunks, and it was very cramped and uncomfortable. A soldier came in and yelled, "You swine, go to sleep." He said that not one of us should so much as look outside or we would all be killed. We heard gunfire all night long. Nobody slept that night. The next morning we were taken outside for Zayal Appel, which was roll call, the counting of prisoners. We still did not know where we were until a German commander came over and said that we were in Auschwitz. He also said not to worry, that we would be able to see our parents the next day. That day never came. Auschwitz was a big place, surrounded by high-voltage electrified barbed wire. There were many long wooden barracks and latrines, which became Our Lady's room. At the front, there was a sentry post containing 2 soldiers with machine guns in their hands. Now, during the day, we heard loud band music. Some prisoners had been selected as musicians, and the music permeated the camp. In the air, we could smell something burning, mixed with a smell resembling burning tar. We saw all of these people march by and then out of sight. Then the air was filled with smoke, and you smelled the tar. And all the time we heard loud band music. What was this madness? Over and over again, we had to stand for Zayal Appel, the repeated counting of prisoners. It was getting hot outside, and the area was very muddy. After hours of standing in line, we were ordered to march, and so we did, passing many other barracks and prisoners. We came to a very large building. Inside were many Gestapo officers. The soldiers were yelling, commanding us to take off our clothes. Nobody moved. Immediately there were violent attacks on us with long leather whips, and slowly everybody removed their clothing. We stood there, naked, embarrassed, and in pain. We were then taken to another room where the Gestapo ordered men to cut off all of our hair. There were German soldiers in this room, and we had to walk naked in front of them as they inspected our bodies. After a very hot shower, other prisoners who were supervisors called capos stood in front of us and behind us, mopping our bodies down with kerosene. A few minutes later, we were ordered back into the hot showers. We remained locked in a room for a long time. Finally, the door opened and the guards roused us out, wielding blows to our bald heads and naked bodies. We were taken to another room, beaten as we went. There were long tables containing grey prisoner dresses and wooden clogs. We put on the dresses and the shoes and began to march back to the barracks, being beaten all the way. We were tattooed with a number on the inside of our left forearm. My number is A17855. This became my only identity. This was Auschwitz.
This is where my mother lost her mother. This is where my mother was marched into a living hell. This is where she was stripped completely of all human dignity. This is where she became only a number.
The next day, the door to our barracks opened and a Gestapo officer came in, saying that he needed women for a labor detail, and if we worked hard, we would live. Whatever the work was, it could be our salvation. We were gathered up and marched out of Auschwitz to the train, once again being crammed into the cattle cars. We endured another brutal transport until the train stopped. We had arrived at this camp Plaszow, which was in Krakow, Poland. All around us were beautiful mountains. Within the camp was a Jewish cemetery, which we knew from the Hebrew lettering on the headstones. We learned that many prisoners in this camp were not Jews, but political prisoners and men who had committed other crimes, including murder. In the eyes of the Nazis, these criminals were still better than Jews, so they became our capos, and we became their slaves. Each day, we marched from our barracks to the edge of the mountains. The capos would drill holes in the stone, place long sticks of dynamite into the holes, and blast the mountainous rock into chunks and pieces that flew out in all directions. Then we had to pick up the pieces of rock, most of them quite large and heavy, lift them over our heads and pass them from one to another, removing them from the hillside. The capos would brutally beat us. At one point, while picking up the stones, I was beaten like a horse that cannot pull a wagon. We had no food or water all day. We worked and we starved. The Nazi commander of this camp would come around, riding a white horse, accompanied by 2 large dogs. He came and shot people before his breakfast. One morning, there were some rations of food missing. This commander lined up some prisoners and proceeded to shoot every other one as punishment, and as an example to the rest of us who were made to stand and watch. Another day came and we were again working with the heavy stones that were blasted from the mountainside. The hot sun was parching our bodies. Then it began to rain. The cool rain felt so good on our hot bodies, but the rain made it difficult to work in the mud. We saw the Nazi commander coming with his dogs and machine gun. I was so nervous and upset I lost my footing and fell, rolling down the hillside, landing sprawled on the ground right in front of the commander. I thought for certain that he would kill me. Instead, he began to laugh very hard, finding my tumbling very funny. He yelled something out in German, and 2 girl capos came and took me to the so-called sick room. In this room, there were 2 men wearing white coats over their uniforms. They tended to my hand and foot, which were both bleeding. Then they told me to put my dress back on, gave me a glass of water, and a note telling me to go back to my barracks. It began to get dark. I saw a very quiet place in an area behind the sick room. There were no soldiers, no capos. I did not realize that I was in the cemetery. I thought the best thing to do was to stay where I was. I would eat some grass and stay in a hole that was in the ground, which was a grave. Suddenly, I heard the faint sound of my sisters calling, "Atkar, Atkar." I followed the sound in the dark and found them. We walked together in the dark and found our way back to the barracks.
This place is like a cemetery of buried memories. I have to look deeply for the remnants of the past and the brutality suffered at the hands of Amon Geth, his soldiers, and capos. But those memories are here.
The next day again, roll call. Then came the commander on his white horse, escorted by the 2 German shepherds. To me, he looked as if he was going to explode. He was like a walking time bomb. He just shouted, "March!" And we marched back to the cattle train. The doors were closed, and the train pulled out. To our horror and despair, we had arrived back in Auschwitz. I'm sorry to say that I remember Dr. Mengele, the angel of death. Thousands of people would march before him, and he chose people to go to the right or to the left, deciding who would live or die, or become a guinea pig for perverse medical experiments being performed on prisoners in the camps. Achtung! We stood up and marched into a building and then into a large room. We were stripped naked. When they called our number, we had to answer, "Jawohl," and walk in front of this doctor, this angel of death. If the doctor told you to go to the right, you lived. If he told you to go to the left, you went to the gas chamber and the crematorium. My 3 sisters went before me, and each was sent to the right. When he came to me, the doctor said, "Left." My sisters marched out of the room as they were told, but I stayed. My worst fear had been realized. Not only separation from my sisters, but a certain death sentence. As I stood there, I said a small prayer. "Please, dear God, I am only 20 years old. I would like to live and see myself free. What is my sin? To be 20? To be Jewish? Please help me. Let me live. Let me go to my sisters." Just at that point, they got an unexpected visit from the Gestapo. They were all shouting about something. Then, almost without thinking, I ran out. I ran toward a large group of women that were marching to a train. I called after my sisters, "Atkar, Atkar," but there was no answer. For a moment, I panicked. Then I saw a few girls near the train tracks. Those girls turned out to be my sisters. We went up to the train and into one of the cars. My sisters and a few other girls sat on top of me because they came looking for the skeleton that ran away. Slowly, the train began to move. I thanked God for my escape. After several days of another brutal trip, we came to a city called Augsburg in Germany. We were unloaded from the train, and they began to break us up into small groups to work at various factories around the city. My sisters and I were selected to work in an airplane factory producing delicate parts. This became our new camp. We were assigned to various workers and machines, observing how each one was operated. We began to operate the machines after a while, and the engineer was happy with our work. We would work from 6 in the morning until 6 in the evening. It was hard, but we were happy that there were no more beatings, no crematory, no Auschwitz. We prisoners had a separate area in which we ate. We were given a bowl of soup and bread. I was feeling much better and had even gained a little weight. While we were working, we heard planes flying overhead. They were American planes, and the Germans would run to their shelters. We had to stay by our machines. While bombs were falling all around us with loud sounds and burning smoke, I was not afraid. Just seeing the American planes gave us hope. In April, day and night, the city was bombed, and for several days nobody went to work, and we remained in our sleeping quarters. After a few days, the commander came and told us there was to be a roll call. The Nazis were angry, very angry. We were marched down to the train to be transported yet again.
My mother saved herself from Mengele and Auschwitz, but the factory in Augsburg sustained her and restored her hope. I can only try to sense how she must have felt, being thrust back into uncertainty and fear.
We arrived at Waldlager, which means forest camp because this place was in a forest. There were many trees with high slender trunks and long leaves clustered at the top. Looking up through the treetops, you could see the sky. I looked up and thought to myself, what a beautiful place. Nobody will ever find us here. There was a selection for hard labor, and we stood in line as straight and as strong as we could. As we stood in line, a female officer came over to us. Then she yelled, "Achtung, march!" And we did, through this beautifully peaceful forest. A high fence separated us from the male prisoners, these poor living skeletons. Here the barracks were bunkers, buried in the ground, looking like graves. There was a large door on top of the ground that led down to a dark, cold hole, just like a grave. At the bottom of the hole there was straw, on which we laid down and tried to sleep. Early next morning, we awoke to shouting for Zeil Appel. My sisters and I were chosen for work. I had a wheelbarrow packed with heavy stones. I got beaten because I couldn't move it fast enough. It was cold and very windy. All I had on was a gray prison dress and a pair of wooden clogs. We marched back to the bunker and stood for Zeil Appel. Then an officer shouted, "Verschwinden!" which meant disappear, and he left for the night. After the officer left, we all ran near the fence that separated us from the male prisoners. Many of the men came over to the fence to talk to us. I saw two young boys standing together. I looked at them, and they moved closer. They started speaking Polish, then Yiddish, then German, trying to communicate with me. I was not fluent in any of these, so I couldn't understand them. I said to Gizzy, "Do you see those two? One of them, the taller one, has the most beautiful eyes. He has so much love in his eyes." I told her that if we were free, I was going to marry him. Gizzy said, "Aranka, you're getting crazy." I hadn't really even spoken to him, but I had a very strong feeling about him. It grew very dark, and we had to go into our bunker. I kept thinking about the boy with the love in his eyes. The next day brought more hard labor. It was a cold, windy, nasty morning. As I looked through the fence, I saw the good-looking boy with the love in his eyes. We just looked at each other. I even smiled. Somehow, for a moment, I didn't feel the cold. I had never felt this way before. Working all day, I couldn't wait for the night to come so I could see him. That evening, the first thing the boy did through the fence was to tell me his name. It was Josef. He kissed my hand through the fence. It was even colder now, and he took off his prison jacket, throwing it over the fence so that I could wear it. He gave me his bread, which was his food for the next day. I just stared as he walked away. I began to cry. I thought, if this boy could give me his jacket so that I would not be cold, and his bread so that I would not be hungry, then maybe I was still a human being. We were falling in love. I think that this gave me the will to live from then on. The next night, Joseph came to the fence with a young boy, about 13 years old. The boy spoke Hungarian as well as Yiddish, and he became our interpreter. Joseph told me, through the boy, that I should meet him at the end of the fence the next day. He said that he loved me. I said that as long as I lived through the next day, I would meet him. The next day came, and I told my sisters I wanted to meet Joseph. They all walked me over to the end of the fence where there was a small opening. Joseph was waiting there for me. He wanted me to come with him to his bunker. He said that his friend was there, so we would not be alone, and we would only stay for a few minutes. The Nazis weren't around, so I squeezed through the small opening and went with Joseph. At his bunker, Joseph kissed me, and he told me that he loved me. He gave me a copper ring with his initials on it. A friend of his worked in a shop inside this camp making jewelry for the Nazis. His friend had made this ring for Joseph to be my engagement ring. He told me in 7 different languages that he loved me and that he had never seen a girl as beautiful as me. For now, ours would be a forbidden love. Loving somebody that you cannot call yours. Loving somebody that you cannot talk to or touch or kiss whenever you please. How can you love when you are only a number? But we were in love. We kissed and hugged each other, then hurried out to get back to the fence before any guards came around. I told my sisters what Joseph said about my being the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. I said that I didn't understand how, seeing that if there were any less skin on my bones, I would fall apart. Not to mention my almost totally bald head. We all laughed. It became dark, and we all went into the bunker. I felt like singing and dancing. I soon came down off cloud 9, feeling the cold, hard ground of the bunker beneath me.
The Holocaust was so horrific, and everybody would wish it had never happened. But at the same time, for me, if not for the Holocaust, my parents would never have met. I would never have been. So I've always felt a very personal sense of irony about the Holocaust.
We had been in this camp for about 2 weeks when we awoke one morning to a big commotion. I went near the fence looking for Joseph, and he was there looking for me. He told me that we were going to be transferred out. He would try his best to be on the same train. He gave me his piece of bread and tried to kiss me through the barbed wire. He was so excited at the prospect of leaving this camp with me. Once again, we were loaded onto the cattle train, squeezed together like sardines. The train pulled out and moved ahead slowly. We were still separated, men from women. I knew that Joseph must be nearby in another car of the train. There was bombing that we heard but could not see. More bombs kept falling all around us. Finally, the train stopped. The doors opened and the Nazi guards were screaming, "Raus! Raus!" All of the people, dead or alive, were taken off the train. We heard planes flying and bombing in the near distance. Some of the planes were flying so low that we could see them quite clearly. They were American planes. The bombing stopped. Then the Nazis began machine gunning the prisoners. We all huddled underneath the train behind the large iron wheels and didn't move. I still had not seen Joseph and was very worried about his safety. After a while, it became quiet. No planes, no bombing, and no machine guns. We didn't see any soldiers, only many dead prisoners around us. We went back into one of the cars of the train. Another prisoner came to our car and told me that Joseph and another friend had been shot. My heart sank. I had no feeling anymore. As I looked out of the car, I saw a Nazi guard with a few men pushing a wheelbarrow loaded with bread. As they came closer, I realized that one of the men was Joseph. I felt alive again, and I called out to him. He was looking for me also. With every car that he passed, he said that he prayed he would find me. Joseph said that we shouldn't stay here at the train. He thought that it would be wiser to move towards the Americans, into the forest on the other side of one of the mountains. We were down to a small group consisting of Gizzy, Bori, Ella, Joseph, a few others, and myself. Joseph said, "Come with me and we will be free." I could not move. Emotionally, physically, I was drained. "Go then, be free," I said to Joseph. "No, I cannot be free without you," he said. He picked me up and slid down the mountainside with me in his arms. We heard shooting and bombing, but somehow, thank God, we made it to the other side of the mountain before sundown. However, our happiness was short-lived when we saw what was there: Gestapo with dogs, machine guns, and other prisoners. I told Joseph that I loved him, but feared this was the end. The Nazis loaded us back onto the train. We moved out slowly. Nobody knew to where. A few minutes later, the bombing began. The train was hit very hard, but we did not move. The fighting had become more intense than we had ever seen. Then there was a loud noise, and the train stopped. Suddenly, the doors to our cattle car opened, and there stood American soldiers. We were free. The Americans had their victory, and we had our freedom. Thank God. It was May 1st, 1945, and I turned 21 years old. It was my birthday, and I received the greatest gift possible, a gift from God, my life, my freedom. People from the Red Cross came and brought us to a DP, displaced persons camp, called Feldafing. Before, this place had been a Hitler youth camp. We each received a change of clothing, a bar of soap and a towel. We showered, had some cereal, and went to sleep. Now our guards were the American soldiers. Within a few days, several doctors came to examine us, giving us vitamins to go along with the good food we had been receiving. My, what they must have thought of the living skeletons. I did not see Joseph for days. The men were in a different building next to ours. My sisters and I stayed in 3 rooms that were like a small apartment. Perhaps this had been an officer's quarters. Gizzy noticed the most beautiful draperies hanging on the windows. To our surprise, she took them off and said these would be our dresses. The grounds were large, with many big buildings and a nearby lake, all surrounded by a beautiful forest. As I was walking back to our room, I saw Joseph walking with a friend. I called after him. He just stared at me. His eyes filled with tears. He started to cry and could not stop. Finally, he recovered and told me that he was crying because his mother was not here to see the beautiful girl that he loves. Joseph came from Pabianice, Poland. He was the eldest of 3 sons. In the early days of the Nazi invasion of Poland, the eldest male of all Jewish households had to go to work in a labor camp. Joseph's father left home while Joseph was away working. When he returned home, Joseph found his mother crying, and she told him what had happened. He said that being the eldest son, he would go to the labor camp to take his father's place. As Joseph entered, his father exited. They paused for a tearful hug and a kiss. That was the last time that Joseph saw his father, mother, and 2 brothers, and his family home became part of the Pabianice ghetto. Joseph performed various labor details in Pabianice, including unloading supplies from the train station. He was then sent to the Lodz ghetto for a short time before being deported. Joseph had endured over 5 years of inhuman treatment and hard labor in various ghettos and camps. He was also tattooed at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and his number is 159337. Following the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and the Nazis' bombing of that ghetto, Joseph was transported there to remove bricks, rubble, and bodies from the bombed-out buildings. He said that it was so cold that pieces of his skin came off as they passed bricks from man to man. From there, Joseph was transported to Waldlager, where he worked with heavy bags of cement, building the bunkers and shelters for the Nazi airplanes. In Feldafing, Joseph came over to our place every day. We would take long walks. As we walked, I would speak Hungarian to him. He learned very quickly, more and more each day. Every day, Joseph would come and bring me flowers that he had picked on the grounds. He said that one day we would have our own garden so I could have flowers each day. He said that our romance would last forever, and that he would never change. Love was able to blossom for us despite the destruction of our lives and the personal losses we had shared. I was deeply in love with Joseph, and he with me, and it became obvious that we would marry. Gizi and Bori had become very close with Bela and David, both of whom they had met in Waldlager, and they too were in love. Ella met a Polish man in Feldafing. His name was Henry, and their relationship progressed quickly into a strong and deep bond. One morning, Joseph came to me and said that we were going to get married the next day. We all went to this office in Traubing. It was June 26, 1945. We all lined up side by side and got married. As we walked back to Feldafing, I said to my new husband while he was kissing me, "You know, I only married you on paper. I would like to get married in a Jewish ceremony, the traditional way, and I would like to have a white dress." Joseph thought for a moment. Then he said, "All right, we will marry tomorrow with a rabbi and music." The next day, June 27, 1945, Joseph told me that our wedding would be at 5 o'clock that afternoon. He had made all the arrangements. Joseph's friend, the jeweler who made my engagement ring, had borrowed 3 white wedding gowns from German families in the area. I chose the nicest one, and my sisters helped me dress. We took our vows in the tradition of the Jewish people. We were now man and wife in the eyes of God. We were very happy, but very sad at the same time. We were both crying, thinking about our parents and how they weren't here to see us get married.
Love and sorrow, chaos and serenity, hope and despair. These were the paradoxes of life for my parents. But finally, here, they were free to love and free to live. And I felt so peaceful and grateful here.
A friend of Joseph's came to visit us from Weilheim, a city not far from where we were staying. He told Joseph that in his DP camp, married couples were permitted to live together in their own room. We went to Weilheim by train and registered in the DP camp there. We went back the next day to let my sisters know about our intention of staying in Weilheim. One of our friends said that a transport had come leaving for Italy en route to Israel. My sisters had told this friend that they would pick Joseph and I up, but we must have missed them in transit. I became heartsick. I cried so hysterically that people thought I had gone mad. Although it had become obvious that we all had different feelings and plans, nothing definite had really been decided. I was gone for one day, and I felt as if I had lost my sisters. We had been through hell and back, always with one thought: to remain together. My sisters were still together, but I felt left behind. Worse yet, we never had the chance to say goodbye. It was here in Germany that Joseph learned the fate of his family. Joseph's father went to Auschwitz and perished there. Joseph's mother and the niece in her care had been sent to the crematory. Joseph's younger brother Shlomo was beaten to death with a shovel for failing to perform a work detail. Naturally, the news hit Joseph very hard. Joseph received no information about his youngest brother Leib. One day, somebody told Joseph that they had seen his brother Leib somewhere in the British zone. He was alive. Joseph sent word to all the DP camps in the British zone. Finally, after about 1 week, Leib did arrive. With the happiness, there was sadness too, for the years of separation, the horrors endured, and now the reality of their loss. As in all DP camps, Feldafing had a register of people's names and locations. My heart skipped a beat as I read my name with a note to see somebody in the office. It was a letter from my Aunt Sarah, my father's sister, speaking on behalf of my father's family in America. The letter said that they were happy to locate me and would do everything they could to help me come to America. I wrote to my Aunt Sarah and told her that I was married. I wrote about what had happened to Joseph's family. Leib was all the family that Joseph had, and I could never ask him to leave without Leib. It was agreed. Joseph, Leib, and I registered in order to emigrate to America. One day we heard about an incoming transport containing many Hungarians. We sneaked into a smoky room filled with people. My eyes fell on a familiar face, and I thought my heart would burst through my chest. It was my sister Eva. She was with a man, her new husband. His name, like my brother's, was Latsi. We were ecstatic to see each other. Before our world had been shattered, Eva had been working as a beautician and living in Budapest. As things grew worse, Eva moved from place to place, being helped by friends. Eva had also suffered a lot, all the time running and hiding. Her family was taken from her, their fate unknown. When the war was over, she returned and married Latsi, and they began to search for family members. One morning, the doorbell rang at the house that we were staying in. I opened the door, and there stood my brother Latsi, who followed my sister Eva from Atkar. We were both overwhelmed with happiness. We hugged, talked, and cried for days. The hardest thing for me was to explain what happened to our mother and to recount the things the rest of us had been through. Before the Nazi occupation, Laci had gone off to the Hungarian army like many boys his age. When the Nazis came, he first became their soldier and then their slave. Thankfully, he was able to survive. It was 1947, 2 years since our liberation from the camps, and we were still in Germany. One day we received notice for Josef, Leib, and I to go to Munich. We were to go to the American consulate. We were dancing with happiness. I was also sad at the thought of leaving my brother Laci and my sister Eva. However, they had applied to emigrate, and it would only be a matter of time until they would follow us there. From Munich, we had to travel to the harbor in Bremerhaven. However, when we arrived, the ship had already left. We would have to wait for the next one to come. We were able to stay at this port, and 2 weeks later, the next ship arrived. I was happy at the prospect of a new, free life, but saddened at the thought of a large ocean between me and my brother and sisters. The ship pulled away from the dock, and we left Germany behind.
It must have taken such courage to make this journey. The prospect of a new life mixed with the regrets of leaving their old lives behind. But the destruction of their lives and loss of family had already made that decision. It was time to refill the empty shells.
We sailed for about 2 weeks. Early one morning, somebody began to scream, "Wake up! We're in America!" Everybody jumped up and ran onto the deck. The first thing I did was to thank God that we had arrived safely. Then my eyes fell upon a welcoming sight, the Statue of Liberty. There in the middle of New York Harbor, this beautiful lady representing the welcome mat to freedom. My eyes filled with tears. Joseph and Leib came up to the deck and found me. The three of us stood there, stared and cried. We were really here, in America. Our dream for a new life had come true. Our lives did go on. My brother Laci and my sister Eva and Ella all came to America, and Gizzy and Boris settled in Israel. We had children, raised our families with love, and remained close, even if we lived far apart. We have reached a stage where our children are grown men and women, and we have been able to experience the joy of grandparenthood and even great-grandparenthood. I have been blessed with happiness. I am grateful for the man I love. We have shared the same dreams, and they have come true. Although my life has prospered and known much joy, some nightmares remain and have been placed before you. Remember them. Tell them to your children and to your children's children. Tell them when they are old enough to understand that these were real, living nightmares that must never happen again to anybody. Some people are still persecuted because of their religious beliefs or the color of their skin. I hope that the world protest does not stop, and another Holocaust should never be.
My journey found the remnants of the past in the present and connected me so much more to both. But it also made me realize the importance of sharing these memories. and just how prophetic those words of my mother's diary were over 30 years ago, and how relevant they still are today. Dementia has now indeed erased some of my mother's horrific memories. Perhaps that is the only positive aspect of the disease. It does not discriminate against the bad memories that it robs from her, along with many of the good ones. It's been said that love conquers all things, and for my parents, that seems to be so.
Oh, this is my engagement ring. It's made in love. God love us.
We are here and Hitler is dead.
That's right. What else is there? Just love. All the love is here. Forever. Right?
Right.
He still loves me.
For 25 years, you wash my socks.
64 years.
He said 54 years. You cut it in half.
Okay, so it's for 54. And then you still ask me, do you love me?
Do you love me? I love you forever.